You brush frost from a rune-scratched stone with the pad of your thumb, and the grit that clings to your skin tastes faintly of salt as the morning fog lifts over Brattahlíð. It's the early 15th century in Greenland's eastern settlement, the homestead first linked to Eric the Red, and you're up before the sun can find the fjord, working by the slow silver of a sky that wants to stay undecided. The stone is colder than everything else you touch, colder even than the iron nail you keep in your belt, as if it remembers a night you slept through. That's the first thing that tugs at your thoughts. You lean close to the turf wall and study the frost feather patterns on its grass-blunt edge, the way you'd read an elder's face, looking for whether the day means to hold or break. You jaw a breath into your hands and make a small cup of heat, then rub the stone until the runes show. A simple bind mark, half charm and half inventory, the sort of mark a household uses so objects behave and don't wander. The mainstream fact rests in the land itself. Norse settlers established two principal colonies here in the late 900 seconds, the eastern and western settlements, and for centuries they raised cattle and sheep, cut hay, and traded walrus ivory, and hides down the North Atlantic rope of ships. Your quirky habit is to taste the frost, just once, to test for that whisper of salt. When the tang's there, you know sea mist has come up the fjord before dawn. It matters, because salt frost means the wind has an onshore bend, and an onshore bend means weather that can tangle a day's plans, from where you cut driftwood to whether a boat should bother its mooring. You kneel and listen, because out here, sound is weather too. The black-backed gulls rearrange the horizon with their slow scribbles, and you turn your head to follow their gossip. More birds over the western shoulder of the fjord than the east means the pack ice has shifted. Historians still argue whether Brattahlíð kept a steady year-round household this far into the 1400s, or whether families thinned to seasonal bones. But this morning your tasks line up as if no argument exists at all. Fire, fodder, watch the water, mind the door. You run a palm along the doorway's whalebone lintel and feel old cuts under your glove, grooves from a blade that knew patience. Nar is the word your elders used for a stout cargo ship, a broad-bellied sea boat, built for trade rather than raiding. You picture one nosing in under a sky like pewter, its sail a tired lung, and you let the image pass, because today there is only the fog and the work inside it. Driftwood waits in a heap that's more hope than firewood, gray with salt and argument. If it won't catch, you'll coax the seal fat wick first and use its steady flame to train the damp sticks how to behave. You pocket the runestone again, close to the heat of your wrist, and the cold of it steadies you the way a promise does. You shoulder the turf door on its leather hinge and feel the wall's weight agree to move. The fog follows you an inch, then loses courage at the threshold. Inside, your fingers find the tinder you tucked in a clay cup last night lichen, a twist of birch bark, a coil of sinew for luck, and you keep the rune-scratched stone in your fist while you crouch in the doorway to raise a small seal-fat flame that will speak the day's first clear sentence. You crouch in the turf doorway and raise a small seal-fat flame, letting it lick the wick until the light steadies and your breath learns the pace it wants. The rune-scratched stone stays in your fist while you feed the lamp's patience to the driftwood, laying the gray sticks like ribs over a quiet heart. The turf wall breathes damp against your shoulder. You listen to the fire the way you'd listen to a calf hiccup, ready to offer another pinch of tinder if it sounds unsure. Outside, fog presses a cheek to the threshold, and then thinks better of entering. A mainstream fact warms itself beside the hearth. Norse farmsteads in Greenland were built of turf and stone, with low doorways and thick walls, made to keep heat in and weather out when timber was scarce, and the wind had a talent for finding gaps. You trim the lampwick with a little bone tweezer, Then teach the driftwood to join the flame's small ends first. Bark to bark, no hurry. Your quirky habit is to hum a short rising note as you lean in, a tune with only 3 steps. When the smoke thins at the top of your breath, you know the chimney's drawing. It matters because smoke that won't rise means the wind's about to turn your room into a lung that exhales soot, and soot means coughing, and coughing means the day tugs at you from the wrong end. You rub the chill out of your wrists and hold the runestone tighter, as if the old cuts on its face can share a little of their stubbornness with the wood. By the time the sticks agree to flame, the lamp can rest. You set it on a stone shelf and watch the tongue of fire make a lake of amber on the fat surface. A quiet lesson in endurance. Historians still argue whether families here relied more on seal oil than on driftwood as the decades wore down their farms, or whether trade kept enough timber landing on rough beaches to make hearths behave. Either way, you keep both at hand, because Greenland doesn't always choose. You glance to the ceiling and read the smoke's fingers. Straight at first, then a thoughtful slant to the north. Wind off the ice cap then, not from the sea, good for a clear run of sky if the day decides to be kind. You step back into the doorway and let your eyes adjust so the world beyond the turf can gather its edges. The fjord is a sheet of hammered pewter. The gulls redraw the horizon with their inked wings. The far shoulder of land sits like a sleeping ox. You close your fingers around a sliver of walrus ivory you keep near the hearth for luck. An offcut from a comb someone once carved when ships still came regular, and feel its faint grease warm to your skin. Evidence suggests traders prized Greenland ivory in Europe for rosary beads and chessmen, small sanctities made from far weather. You like the way the offcut anchors the hand that holds it. Weight talks sense to nerves. You push the door wider with your knee and stand half in the house, half in the morning, reading the smoke, reading the birds, letting the stone cool in your palm while the ivory warms. The fog lifts by the mouth of the fjord, showing a thin seam of the sea lane like a thread a needle might find if it squints. You roll the ivory offcut from knuckle to knuckle, a habit you don't admit has comfort in it, and step out onto the packed earth with it settled in your palm, weighing it once, as if it could tell you whether any ship will trouble this horizon today. You roll the ivory offcut once more in your palm as you step onto the packed earth, and you hold it up against the thin seam of sea lane. The fog just surrendered, weighing hope the way you'd weigh a small tool before using it. The offcut warms to your skin, but the wind keeps its edge. You square your shoulders to it and watch the gulls redraw the horizon with those same slow scribbles you read at first light. You listen for thrum, or shout, or the slap of a sail that's learned the fjord's echo. Nothing answers but water hush and the far clack of ice. Upslope, frost still bristles on the turf walls like beards that refuse a comb, and you rub the ivory with your thumb as if smoothness might put a shine on distance. You walk the short path to the landing place and stand where a nar would nose if any still came nar. A stout, broad-bellied cargo ship built for trade. Your quirky habit is to tap the ivory soft against your front tooth and listen for the bright ring that means it's old and dry rather than green. It's a woodworker's trick, stolen and bent to ivory. It matters because a bright ring reminds your mind of markets, comb blanks, and bead rods rather than of loss, and reminders are a kind of brace when the day leans too far. The mainstream fact sits stern and plain. For centuries, these settlements lived within a North Atlantic trade, shipping walrus ivory, hides, and ropes south while iron, timber, and cloth came north. A seesaw that kept farms like this more than stubborn stories. You scan the mouth of the fjord and choose small tests to keep the body from learning the word waiting. Count 9 gulls on the gunnel-shaped rock. Count 10 breaths until the water forgets a ripple. Count 15 heartbeats to see whether the wind holds true. The counts come out clean and unhelpful. Historians still argue whether the worst wound was climate, the Little Ice Age squeezing pastures and locking sea lanes, or the market's change when cheaper elephant ivory thinned the price of tusk from Greenland, or the slow drift of people and skill to other edges, where a living seemed less like a dare. You don't argue, you watch. A rind of pack ice loiters where the fjord shoulders meet the sea, casual as a guest who means to stay. You picture a knotted rope wet and saltbitter in your hands, the climb of a sail like a lung, a deck crowded with faces you'd read for port news and gossip, and the picture tugs, then frays. Evidence suggests one or two ships still found these coasts deep into the 14th century, late as anyone sane would try. But even the sanest of captains bargain with risk, and risk can be a creditor who doesn't smile. You lower the ivory and let it sit like a pebble in your fist, small and wholly understood, unlike the horizon. You turn inland, toward the little church that keeps its place above the landing like a hand on a shoulder, and the path stiffens under your boots where meltwater ran and froze again. The bell there hasn't spoken in months, maybe longer, but the doorway still faces east, like a face that knows where light will come from when it comes. You brush past low willow, cross the yard where the grass gives up with a brittle hiss, and reach the lintel fallen slantwise at the threshold. Your fingertips find its weathered grain, and you set the ivory in your pocket so one hand can rest on the stone, while the other rises to trace a cross where a bell ought to be heard. You keep your fingers on the fallen lintel while you trace the cross where a bell ought to be heard, and the stone returns only its own cold, a hush shaped like absence. The doorway faces east as it always has, the threshold sunk by centuries of souls that didn't argue with weather, and you step inside the little nave that still remembers knees. Thiodhild's chapel down the coast was small. Like this, archaeologists found its turf and stone outline near Brattahlíð. And these farm churches once stitched faith to pasture the way. A good seam holds a cloak to wind. The altar stone bears the sadness of a cup-shaped hollow where a chalice used to rest. You smooth the rim with your thumb, feeling grit give up from the pores of rock, and breathe the dust that smells faintly of salt and old smoke. You set a hand on the sill where a salter would have lived and find an iron nail lifted proud of the grain. Your quirky habit is to count nail heads the way other people count days. 1 for chores, 2 for weather, 3 for the hope of a ship. It matters because numbers let a mind walk a furrow even when the field is frozen, and walking a furrow is how you keep from wandering where fear waits. You listen for the bell again, ear trick, heart trick, and hear only the water's tired patience outside the turf walls. A candle stub no larger than your thumb lies in a corner. You rub its tallow between finger and forefinger until the frost damp makes it shine like a remembered yes. The nave is the size of a good room, and the air is colder than thought. You whisper a verse because sound needs company, then stop because the roof's reed matting whispers back as if correcting your Latin. Mainstream fact lives even in this quiet. Parish tithes once bound these Greenland farms to bishops in far Bergen. Wool and hides were counted for God as much as for markets. And a priest, when one wintered over, carried tidings the way a ship's mast carries a sail. Historians still argue whether the last Massa here was spoken by a visiting cleric or by a farmer who knew enough words to make the room kinder, but the argument won't alter how the light falls in ridges across the packed earth floor. You kneel anyway, and lay your palm flat where the chalice would have stood. The stone is so cold it feels like another kind of heat, the hard kind that takes without asking. You take the rune-scratched stone from your pocket and rest it on the altar, the way you might leave a pebble on a cairn so the landscape knows you've passed through respectfully. In the corner, a broken crozier shard whalebone carved with a little human face peers from peat like a relic that got tired and lay down. Evidence suggests the clergy thinned as surely as the herds, each winter tugging one more thread loose from a garment nobody knew how to mend from this far north. By late light, the room gives back only what you brought into it. The sound of your breath, the scuff of your boot, the shape of a wish. You lift the runestone, tuck it away, and step backward through the door into an afternoon that has decided to become clear. Sky shows a hard blue like polished iron, the fjord's skin glints, and the wind pins a strip of cloud to the western ridge, as if it intends to sow it there. Near the landing place, the snow is written over with small lines, and you kneel to read them. Narrow footprints pressed deep, double-stitched by someone who knows where ice thins, and a single, clean keel mark arrowing out from the shore into open water. Qajaq is the word that comes to you, the skin-on-frame kayak used by your nearest neighbors. A narrow boat paddled low to the water, built for seal, for fish, for moving quiet. You rise and raise your hand in the greeting you've practiced until it lives in your joints, palm turned, empty, the wind trying to take the gesture and wear it like a mitten while you look toward the bright keel scratch widening into the fjord. You keep your hand raised in that practiced greeting while your eyes follow the bright keel mark widening into the fjord, and the qajaq answers your stillness with its own paddle paused, bow steady, the paddler's fur hood bristling where the wind tests its edge. The greeting feels right in your joints, palm turned, empty, and you let the hand fall only when the boat draws near enough that you can see the stitchwork along the sealskin deck, neat as any hem you've ever admired. A second qajaq flickers from behind a hummocked lip of ice, and then a third farther off, the three of them spaced like careful thoughts. Mainstream fact runs under the waterline here. The Norse of Greenland shared coasts with the Dorset, and later Thule peoples, ancestors of today's Inuit, whose skill with sea ice, seal hunting, and small boats made a living where your cattle balked. You step to the water's edge with your shoulders squared to the wind and lift your chin the way old neighbors do when words are secondary. You kneel and lay your knife on the snow with the blade turned away. Your quirky habit is to set a small seal bone toggle beside it, a trade token you've carried for years, palm worn smooth by worry. It matters because a toggle speaks both languages. Yours for fastening a cloak against the wet, theirs for tethering a line to a harpoon head. And the thing itself says more clearly than your tongue that you mean barter, not trouble. The nearest paddler rocks his qajaq a fraction, a hello in boat grammar, and you read the gesture with relief you don't show in your shoulders. You slide a strip of dried fish from your pouch and place it on the snow by the toggle. He answers with a sealskin thong coiled as tightly as any ribbon in a Bergen shop and lays it down beside your offer. Historians still argue whether contact here was mostly wary exchange or punctuated by open conflict. Stories knotted by scare and scarcity. You can't solve the argument. Only keep your hand steady while you swap what each winner makes the other want. The wind sharpens a little and blows your breath sideways, reminding you to keep this brief. You study the paddler's bow, a slit no bigger than your thumb cut in the skin near the stem, a pressure release for fast landings. You pocket the thong and lay out a few iron nails, scarce as saints this year, palms up so he can count without bending. He chooses two, no more, and sets down a sliver of polished caribou antler carved into a small hook you think will keep your line from snarling. Evidence suggests hooks like these bite cleanly in cold water and turn a fish's mouth without tearing. You touch the bevel and imagine the clean lift of a line from under black ice. He points once up fjord and crosses his forearms in a sign you've learned. The floe edge broke last night. Where the current runs fast near the bend, don't trust the old trail. You nod thanks and point the way your own people mark danger, palm flat, rake it downward as if smoothing rumpled cloth. Then you press your hand to your chest and to your mouth and back to the water. The little loop you taught yourself for, we will go carefully. He shifts the paddle and the qajaq slips sideways like a thought changing its mind, and a second paddler eases close enough to let you see the bone eyelets along his boot tops, each one sewn through with sinew, each stitch a weather decision. You swallow the want that rises. Those boots would carry a person across cold that eats lesser souls, and you answer it by knowing your own leather and what it can do if you grease it before the next hard snap. When it's done, it's done. Trades like this live short by design. You step back from the tide line and make room for the qajaq to nose past the keel mark their bows laid down earlier. The first paddler lifts his chin once, your version of a bow, and the three slip away, low to the water, kin to shadows. You count the beats between their paddle strokes and, for the first time today, feel time move with people in it. The wind stiffens, then steadies. Cloud comes on like a second thought that turns out to be the main one after all. You pocket the caribou hook in the thong and the part of your fear that likes to name itself, and you turn up the slope toward the house because a trade is a hinge. And now, the door on the far side must swing. Food sorted, lashings checked, choices measured against the weather. By the door you pause to scan the ridge for caribou. Thin tracks only, old as the morning, and then duck inside, cheeks burning where frost bit you quick. You set a wooden bowl on the slab table and listen to the emptiness it answers with. The sound is hollower than last week. You count dried fish, the small ones you called little moons when you were a child, and you set the new sealskin thongs beside the bowl to remind your hands what they have. Then you draw your finger along the inside rim to feel how clean your stores have become. No grease left to collect crumbs, and you let the bowl sit there, stubborn as a promise, while the weather outside sharpens its teeth against the door, and the day asks you to say, out loud if needed, what you'll eat now and what you'll save for the cold that's coming. You let the bowl sit stubborn as a promise while you say, out loud if needed, what you'll eat now and what you'll save for the cold that's coming, and the words make the room feel both smaller and more obedient. The new sealskin thongs lie beside the wooden rim like thin roads toward choices, and you count the dried fish again just to make the numbers into something your hands can hold. The wind tries the door with its teeth, then settles to a slow gnaw, and you answer it by setting your knife on the slab, blade turned away, because you want the room to learn gentleness from the things inside it. You portion the day, 3 little moons of fish, a cup of sour milk if the skin bag forgives you, and the last heel of yesterday's flatbread, softened on the hearthstone. You rake the embers into a neat oval and lay a slate over them to warm. A warm plate teaches lean food how to pretend itself bigger. Your quirky habit is to rub the inside of the bowl with a thumb of dried angelica root before you set the fish in. The scent is green and almost sweet, a memory of summer tucked under winter's tongue. It matters because the nose eats first, and if the nose believes there's more here than salt and thrift, the heart will follow without making trouble. The mainstream fact sits right there in the bones piled behind the house. Middens from late Greenland farms show more seal and fewer cattle than the earlier centuries. A drift proved by archaeologists with the tidy patience of sieves and isotopes, and your own teeth have learned to listen for oily, not buttery meals. You break the bread into the broth and watch it swell only a little, as if even crumbs have learned caution. The sour milk glugs like a reluctant neighbor, and then behaves once it finds the heat above the slate. Evidence suggests that winters turned longer and meaner in these waters as the Little Ice Age tightened its belt, but the weather doesn't ask permission to be a theory. It simply arrives and stays. You tie 2 of the seal thongs together and hang them on a peg near the door so your boots remember they have allies. Then take the new caribou hook from your pocket and touch its bevel with a thumbnail until it shines like a well-made argument. When you've eaten, You wipe the bowl with a scrap and tuck the scrap in the fire, a courtesy to tomorrow's you who won't have to smell yesterday's salt. Historians still argue whether the great winter feasts thinned to quiet household meals, or whether a few stubborn gatherings held on like songs everyone knows, even when the chorus gets smaller. Either way, you find you don't need a feast to know you're not alone. Somewhere beyond the ridge, dogs yip, and the sound threads itself into your rafters, and for a moment you can almost feel warmth that isn't inside any room. You check the goat pen, find hooves like commas pressed into the drift, and return with a fist of hair that will twist into cord if asked. Your fingers move by habit line mended, thong knotted, spare wick cut, which is how you keep worry from picking at the seams of your mind. At the slab, you set aside the prettiest fish spine, not for food, for counting. You thread it on a string with others, until the days make a necklace of hunger you can wear like information instead of fear. The church shard you found weeks ago, the carved whalebone with the tired little face, waits on a shelf, and you lay it on the slab beside a comb blank you saved from better years. The two together, looking like a conversation between faith and work. If this quiet kind of history helps you unwind, you can tap like or subscribe. No pressure. The light leans later, thinner, rumor of snow in it, and the fjord turns the color of old iron. You lift the lid of a small chest you haven't opened since the last ship came and ran out of news before it ran out of miles. Inside, cloth you meant to trade lies, folded as if it still knows hands beyond yours, and on top a length of blue glass beads you were saving for a wedding that happened somewhere else. You touch each thing as if you're asking its name again, then lay the comb blank and the little crozier shard beside the chest, testing how they'll fit. The room grows very still around this decision, the kind of stillness that lets you hear snow learning how to begin. You keep your palm on the chest lid a moment, halfway open, halfway closed, while the wind turns a page at the door and the sky outside gathers itself into the kind of night that expects answers. You keep your palm on the chest lid, halfway open and halfway closed, and let that balanced weight decide what kind of night you're going to have. The room listens with you. The wind turns another slow page at the door, and you picture the words on it go, stay, wait, remember, each one trimmed to winter's tight alphabet. You lower the lid until the hasp kisses iron, then lift it again because deciding wants to be repeated, like any lesson you hope will hold. Inside, the folded cloth you meant to trade is still sweet, with a faint soap you stretched with snow. Beside it lies the blue glass you saved for a wedding that happened somewhere else. You take up the comb blank, smooth it once with the heel of your hand, and lay it in the bottom like a plank for a small crossing. The crozier shard whalebone with its tired little face follows, tucked into cloth so bone won't clack against box when steps grow long. You add small, honest wealth. 2 iron nails, 3 seal bone toggles, the caribou hook, a length of sinew coiled on a peg of driftwood, and the rune-scratched stone you've carried since Fog first learned your name. Your quirky habit is to place 1 goose feather under the top layer before you close the chest. You tell yourself it's a scale that will tell you if damp sneaks in. It matters because a chest that breathes wrong turns a journey into rot, and rot writes its own orders no one wants to obey. The mainstream fact has to be faced. By the 1400s, these settlements thinned, the last recorded church burials drifting toward Herjolfsness at the mouth of the fjord. And trade that once felt like a rope began to feel like a rumor. You look toward the door, and then toward the hearth. Your private compass. The fire is down to manners. The slate sighs where it rests on embers. The lamp has made a steady lake of light in its own little cup. You tie the chest with a plaited goat hair cord. You twist 3 strands, because 2 fray where fear rubs, and pull the knot until it answers your hand with a small squeak you can trust in the dark. Historians still argue whether the last departures were tidy emigrations south in odd years, or whether hunger and cold braided people into neighboring families, until names wore new shapes. Your own feet have already learned that paths can become habits before you call them by any name at all. You shoulder a pack and set your ear against the doorboard to hear what the weather has decided. Snow brushes the wood with a sound like parchment. Beneath it, the fjord keeps its steel conversation with the tide. You lift the latch and step into night, and the sky is busy above you, a slow green river traveling without wet aurora, shouldering its way along the darkness, shouldering you, too, toward the thought you've been turning over like a warmed stone. Evidence suggests the graves at Herjolfsnes hold answers in their peat garments and blue beads and the honest grammar of bones, because cold and soil there keep secrets the way a careful woman keeps thread. You walk the track downslope by lantern sense, using the reed of light to measure ice and find earth. The chest rides your shoulder like a child who trusts you enough not to ask where you're going. At the landing place, the keel marks you read this morning have softened under new snow, but they're still there if you look slantwise and let your feet think faster than your eyes. You lay the chest inside the old boat shed where snows can't finger it, and you take only the small spade, the lantern, and the pouch with glass and cord, because the rest of your life can wait under a roof a little longer. The aurora follows like a silent crowd. You move along the shore toward the mouth of the fjord where Herjolfsnes hunkers down, and the water there looks like iron turning in a forge, all edges and light. The low hum of dogs reaches you, and then unthreads into nothing. Your breath makes its own cloak around your face, and then tears itself in two at the edges of your hood. You find the first line of turf that reads like a rule, then another, and kneel where the ground worked by hands like yours, and then forgotten lifts in a shape the wind respects. You plant the lantern deep so it won't talk to the air, press your fingers to the peat until the skin of it agrees to let go, and watch the first crumbs loosen and darken in your palm while the sky writes slow green words you can almost read. You press your fingers to the peat until the skin of it agrees to let go, watch the first crumbs loosen and darken in your palm, and lift your eyes once to the sky where green words keep writing themselves across the night. The lantern's wick answers with a small, steady oval of light, and you make your cut close to your knees so the wind can't negotiate with the flame. The spade slides in with a sound like soaked bread parting. You ease a block free and fold it aside, careful not to tumble the edges, because edges remember. The smell is rich and clean, in its own way. Cold wool, old salt, a rumor of smoke. And you work by measures you could teach to a child. 2 fingers deep, 3 across. Breathe, listen, lift. You trim the cut with your knife until the slice shows a seam in the earth that doesn't belong to weather. Your quirky habit is to grease the spade's lip with a wipe of seal fat before the first cut. It makes the peat shear obediently without tearing. It matters because torn peat lies about what it holds, and truth is a shape as much as a statement. You find a curve before you find a thing, the little familiar arc a human makes without meaning to, and you soften the surrounding soil with your fingertips until the curve becomes more itself, a line of beadwork lying where a throat once warmed it. Blue glass shows first in a dawn-dark spark, then another beside it, and another, a string that has remembered patience better than thread. A mainstream fact steadies your breath. When archaeologists later open graves at Herjolfsnes, they'll find garments kept astonishingly whole by peat hoods and gowns, seams still preaching workmanship, and sometimes strings of blue beads that forgot how to rot. You slide a thin strip of driftwood under the line and let the peat give up, crumb by crumb, until the strand sits like a river on a map. Evidence suggests some beads came from trade that braided these coasts to markets you know only as names Bergen, Bristol, further still. You keep the spade low and the lantern lower, because light thrown sideways makes reliefs out of secrets. A shape resolves near the beads. Wool, pressed into the earth and then persuaded to stay there by cold centuries, The cuff of a sleeve with the ghost of a hemstitch. 2 forward, 1 back. Disciplined even in forgetting. Historians still argue whether the last people were laid here with full rites or with hurried kindness as food thinned and winters counted for more, but your hands decide to act as if patience is the only correct ritual left. You breathe in time with the knife. Slice, hold, wait. Offer the peat a chance to change its mind. Below the sleeve, a rib shows, clean as a line in a song. You look, acknowledge, and cover it again with a fold of sod, because that conversation isn't yours tonight. You thread a loop of cord under the beads with the help of a goat hair needle you carry for mending nets, and you lift the necklace whole, surprised by its willingness to become air again. In the bowl of your palm, the beads remember the lantern's color and answer with their own, not sky blue like hope, not fjord blue like iron, but a softened blue like the inside of quiet. You dust your fingers against your sleeve and make a small promise you don't name. You sit back on your heels and let the cold advise your knees. Around you, the graves keep their low sentences under snow, each a measured mound. The wind reads without moving them. You lower the beads into the pouch with the length of cord you brought and lay a square of cloth over the sleeve's edge you exposed, a courtesy to the night and to whoever once folded that cuff. Far out, the dark water turns its shoulder to the land and pretends not to watch. Nearer, the aurora keeps traveling on its road without asking where it ends. You stand, lantern in one hand, pouch in the other, and look back toward the fjord so the sky can see what you've learned to carry. You stay standing a little longer than you need to, feeling the night come in closer until the wind forgets to test your coat and simply holds it where it lies. The lantern grows comfortable in your hand, the way a mug knows the shape of a familiar grip, and the pouch against your palm takes on the gentle weight of the beads you lifted from the peat. The sky keeps its quiet labor overhead. The long green river slows around a bend you can't see, and the water answers with a patient, metallic hush that sounds like distance deciding to be kind. Your breath finds a slower meter now, something you could walk by without counting, and the edge of the grave settles back to a clean, respectful line. You smooth the cut once with the flat of your palm, only once, enough to leave the place tidy and to remind your hands what tidy feels like. Behind you, the turf house rests in the dark, with the confidence of familiar walls. Ahead, the shore keeps an even curve, black and sure. The lantern light softens at the edges and stops insisting. It becomes a warm suggestion rather than a command. You turn toward home at a pace that lets footsteps choose their own rhythm. The beads settle in the pouch with a small friendly tap when you step down from the ridge, and then they're quiet again, content to be carried. The snow underfoot has learned to hold your weight the way a good listener holds a story, without interruption, and the night closes the distance between your breath and the air until both feel like one slow thing. The fjord lies long and dark to your left, a companion who understands the value of not speaking. At the door you pause, not to listen for weather this time, but to let your shoulders remember what ease is. The latch finds its notch without looking for it. Inside, the room opens softly, the embers answering with a low, even glow. You set the pouch down where the light touches it and don't open it yet. You let the knowledge of what's inside be enough for now. The curtain keeps the window's inch of night, the key knows its nail, and the air cools in a way that asks nothing from you at all. You sit, not to think, only to be as long as it takes for the lantern to lower its voice and for the last picture to arrive. A small strand of blue resting in the cup of your hand, steady as breath, easy to remember whenever you need the shape of quiet.